Children of 76-year-old Evelyn Carter believed they had everything under control. While she lay unconscious in the ICU, they quietly entered her home, took out valuables, sold what they could, and even signed documents to put the house up for sale. In their minds, it was already over. They were certain she would never come back to stop them. To anyone who asked, they gave the same explanation. Medical bills were too high. The house had to be sold. It was the responsible thing to do. But there was something they didn't know. Something no one in the quiet town of Fairview, Illinois, knew. For more than 30 years, Evelyn had been guarding a secret hidden inside that house. A secret tucked behind the kitchen pantry, where an old wooden door stood unnoticed, waiting for the only person who knew how to open it. And the moment Evelyn woke up, weak but alive, everything would change. For more than 40 years, Evelyn Carter had lived in a quiet brick house at the end of Maplewood Drive. It was a simple 2-story home, with a narrow porch and a small garden that she still cared for herself, even though her hands had begun to tremble with age. It wasn't perfect. The paint had faded. The fence leaned slightly toward the street. The roof would probably need replacing soon. But inside those walls was her entire life. The kitchen where she once baked birthday cakes for her 3 children. The living room where Christmas mornings had been filled with laughter and torn wrapping paper. And the small back bedroom where she sat beside her husband, George Carter, holding his hand. Until cancer took him away more than 30 years ago. After George died, everyone expected her to sell the house, move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. But she refused. She had built her life there. She had said goodbye to her husband there. And she made a quiet promise to herself. No matter how silent the house became, it would always remain hers. Years passed, and she held on through determination alone. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper well into her 60s, saved every extra dollar, planted vegetables in her backyard every spring, fixed what she could on her own and only asked for help when there was no other choice. To others, she seemed strong, independent, even stubborn. But what people didn't notice was how rarely her own children came to see her anymore. Andrew Carter lived in Chicago, busy managing a real estate firm. Melissa Carter had built a successful career in marketing and was constantly traveling. And the youngest, Brian, drifted from job to job, always promising, "I'll visit soon." But soon never came. Months passed without visits. Phone calls became shorter, more distant. Holidays changed. Instead of her home being filled with family, she was the one being invited somewhere else. Still, she never complained. She told herself they had their own lives now, that expecting too much would only lead to disappointment. But right next door, life had quietly given her something unexpected. The Turner family. Michael Turner, his wife Sarah, and their 3 children, Lily, Noah, and little Ethan. They didn't have much. Michael worked long hours, sometimes taking extra shifts just to keep up with bills. Sarah managed the home, stretching every dollar, making sure their children never felt how tight things really were. Life wasn't easy for them. There were days when they had to choose between fixing something in the house or saving for groceries. Days when Michael came home exhausted, hands rough from work, barely able to stand. Days when Sarah quietly worried about the future while still smiling for her kids. But despite all that, they never ignored Evelyn. At first, it was just small things. A wave from across the yard. A quick good afternoon. Then one day, Sarah noticed Evelyn struggling with grocery bags. Without hesitation, she walked over and helped her carry them inside. That was the beginning. Soon, Michael started offering rides to the store. "If I'm going anyway, you might as well come with me," he would say with a warm smile. Sarah began bringing over homemade meals. Nothing fancy, just simple warm food, but it meant everything. And the children. The children loved her most of all. They would run into her yard after school, full of energy, talking all at once, telling her about their day, about school, about small victories that felt like the biggest things in the world. Evelyn would sit there, listening, smiling, her eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't in years. Sometimes she gave them advice. Sometimes she just listened. Sometimes she laughed, and slowly. Her quiet house came alive again. The Turners didn't help her because they had extra time. They didn't help her because it was easy. They helped her because they saw her. They saw that she was alone, and they refused to let her feel forgotten. Even on the hardest days, they still showed up. And over time, something changed. Evelyn began to love them like her own family, and they loved her, like a grandmother they never had. Her real children had drifted away, but somehow, life had given her another chance, another family, and she cherished it more than anything, until the night everything changed. It was a rainy evening in early October. Evelyn had just finished washing the dishes. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then, suddenly, a sharp pressure spread through her head. The room began to spin. She grabbed the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself, tried to call out for help, but no words came out. Her body wouldn't listen. Within seconds, she collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor. The world around her began to fade. The last thing she heard was the slow drip of water from the sink. Time passed. Too much time. Until Sarah Turner noticed something strange. The kitchen light was still on, and it had been on for far too long. A quiet feeling of trevoga crept in. She called Michael. Within minutes, they were at the door. No answer. They stepped inside and found Evelyn, lying on the floor, unconscious. Everything after that happened fast. The ambulance, the sirens, the hospital lights, doctors moved quickly, scans, tests, then the diagnosis, a moderate stroke. She was taken to the intensive care unit, connected to machines, her life hanging in the balance as doctors waited to see if her brain would recover. That same night her children arrived. They looked worried, tired. At least, that's how it seemed. But after speaking with the doctors, something changed. Their voices grew quieter, colder, more calculating. Andrew spoke first. "If she doesn't recover, the medical bills will be huge." Melissa crossed her arms. "The house is the only real asset she has." Brian hesitated, then nodded. "We need to decide what to do with it." It no longer sounded like a conversation about their mother. It sounded like a business decision. Within days, they returned to the house, with keys, with a plan. Moving trucks began arriving. Furniture was carried out. Valuables were examined. Antiques were listed for sale. Boxes filled with photographs, dishes, clothes, memories, packed without a second thought. When neighbors asked what was happening, they gave the same answer every time. "Mom is very sick. We're just preparing, in case she doesn't come back." It sounded reasonable, logical, but something about it felt wrong, because while Evelyn lay unconscious in a hospital bed, her life was being taken apart, piece by piece. In less than 10 days, the warm home on Maplewood Drive no longer felt like a home at all. It felt empty. The laughter was gone. The familiar sounds were gone. The rooms echoed in a way they never had before. Furniture had disappeared. Closets stood nearly bare. Even the small desk where Evelyn once kept her papers had been cleared out and packed into boxes, most of them already sent away to donation centers. By the end of the second week, Andrew took it even further. He contacted a realtor and quietly began preparing the house for sale. In his mind, it was already decided. By the time Evelyn woke, if she woke at all, everything would be finished. One afternoon, he stood alone in the silent kitchen. For a brief moment, his eyes passed over the old pantry. He saw nothing unusual, just shelves, just an empty space where food used to be. He had no idea that only inches behind that wall, a narrow wooden panel was hidden perfectly inside it. A door, built decades earlier by a man who believed that some things were too valuable to ever be left in plain sight. Andrew closed the pantry without a second thought and walked away, never realizing that the one place they had ignored was the one place that would soon change everything. Evelyn's children believed the hardest part was already over. The house was almost completely empty. Showings had already been scheduled. The paperwork was moving fast. To them, it was simple. Soon, the house would be sold, and the money divided. Just a matter of time. What they didn't know was that only a few miles away, in a quiet hospital room, Evelyn had just opened her eyes. At first, everything felt distant, blurry, the steady beeping of machines, the quiet voices of nurses, the heavy weight in her body. Her arms felt slow. Her legs didn't respond the way they should. Then, slowly, memories began to return. The kitchen, the dizziness, the fall, the flashing ambulance lights. Later, the doctor explained what had happened. A stroke. Serious, but not fatal. The swelling in her brain had gone down. And with time, with therapy, she had a real chance to recover. Evelyn listened quietly, nodded when needed, but there was only one thing on her mind. "My house," she asked softly. "Is everything okay?" The nurse hesitated. She had heard things over the past days, conversations in the hallway. They didn't sound like worry. They sounded like plans. "Your family has been taking care of everything," the nurse finally said. Later that day, Andrew arrived. He carried a folder in his hands, and the calm confidence of someone who believed he had done the right thing. For a moment, Evelyn looked relieved. "Andrew," she said quietly, "how is the house?" He sat beside her, careful, measured. "Mom, while you were here, we started organizing things," he explained. "The house is too much for you now, especially after this." Evelyn watched him closely. "Organizing." Andrew nodded. "We sold most of the furniture, and we've already put the house up for sale. It'll help cover your care and make everything easier." Silence. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Her gaze slowly drifted toward the window. "You sold my home?" "It's the practical decision," Andrew said. "You can't live there alone anymore." Her voice became very quiet. "Did you check the pantry?" Andrew frowned slightly. "The pantry?" "Yes, the back corner." He shook his head. "Mom, it was just shelves. We cleared everything out. There was nothing important there." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then slowly closed her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. 3 days later, she surprised everyone. She insisted on leaving the hospital earlier than expected. She wasn't fully steady yet. Walking was still difficult, but her determination was stronger than anything the doctors could argue with. "I just need to see my house," she said. That week, Andrew drove her back. As the car turned onto Maplewood Drive, Evelyn saw it immediately, a small sign in the yard, "For sale." She didn't say a word, but her grip tightened around the cane in her hands. When they stepped inside, the silence felt wrong. The house didn't feel like hers anymore. Furniture was gone, walls were bare, rooms that once held memories now felt empty. Melissa and Brian were already there, standing with the realtor, talking about closing dates. They stopped when they saw her. "Mom, you shouldn't be here yet," Melissa said quickly. Evelyn didn't answer. She slowly looked around one last time, then turned toward the kitchen. Her children followed her, confused, unsure of what she was about to do. The kitchen looked almost the same, just emptier. The kitchen felt colder than before, too quiet. The counters were completely empty, and the small pantry door stood slightly open, as if it had been waiting. Evelyn stepped toward it slowly, leaning on her cane. "Did you take everything out of here?" she asked calmly. Brian shrugged. "Just some canned food. Nothing important." Evelyn gave a small nod, then reached for the door, and opened it fully. The shelves were bare, but in the far back corner, something remained untouched. A small wooden section, almost invisible. She stepped closer, lifted her hand, and pressed her fingers against it. A soft click broke the silence. Andrew frowned. "Mom, what are you—" Before he could finish, part of the wall shifted. Slowly, quietly. A hidden door opened inward. Dust lifted into the air as light from the kitchen spilled inside. Behind it was a room none of them had ever seen before. They stood frozen. Inside were metal cabinets, sealed boxes, and a heavy steel safe built into the foundation. For a moment, no one spoke. Evelyn steadied herself against the doorframe and looked back at them. "Your father built this," she said softly. "Years ago." Her voice was calm, but firm. "And everything you thought you had already sold was never out there to begin with." They stared at the hidden room like strangers in their own childhood home. Evelyn slowly stepped inside. Her cane tapped lightly against the floor. "Your father believed that the most important things should never be left where everyone can see them," she continued. Andrew finally found his voice. "What is all this?" Evelyn opened one of the cabinets, pulled out a thick folder, then walked back to the kitchen table and placed it down carefully. Inside were documents, property deeds, contracts, investment records, years, decades of quiet work. She looked at them. "When your father started his construction business, he began buying land whenever he could afford it," she explained. "Back then, no one wanted it, just empty fields." Her eyes softened slightly. "But the city grew. Roads were built. Businesses came. And those forgotten pieces of land became some of the most valuable properties in this entire region." The room fell silent again. "After he passed, I kept managing everything," she added, quietly. "All the records stayed here." Andrew flipped through the documents. His hands began to shake slightly. "These properties," he whispered, "they're worth millions." Melissa stared in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Evelyn looked at them for a long moment. "Because your father and I believed that character matters more than money," she said quietly. A few days later, they all sat together in a lawyer's office. Andrew, Melissa, Brian, and Evelyn. They thought they were there to finalize the sale, to finish what they had already started. But instead, the lawyer calmly explained that the sale could not happen. Not at all. The house, the land, the investments had all been placed into a legal trust years ago. And Evelyn was the only one who could make decisions about it. She had never signed anything, which meant everything they had done meant nothing. The room grew heavy with silence, but the lawyer wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said. "While Mrs. Carter was in the hospital, she made changes to the trust." Andrew slowly leaned back. "What kind of changes?" The lawyer opened a folder. "Most of the assets will now go to charitable organizations," he explained. "A medical foundation that helps stroke patients recover, and a scholarship fund for single mothers starting small businesses." Melissa stared at the table. "And your children will still receive a portion," the lawyer added. A pause. A small portion. Silence filled the room again. But then Evelyn spoke. "There's something else," she said. All eyes turned to her. Her voice was steady. "Part of what your father and I built will go to the Turner family." Andrew blinked. "The neighbors?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes." She looked at each of them. "They were there when none of you were." Her voice softened slightly, but didn't lose its strength. "They helped me when I needed it. They cared for me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." She paused. "They gave me something I thought I had lost. A family." Brian lowered his gaze. "They don't have much," Evelyn continued, "but they never once turned away. They struggled, and still found a way to help me." Her eyes became slightly moist. "And I want to give something back." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Andrew said nothing. Melissa looked down. Brian clenched his hands. For the first time, they understood. Not just what they had lost, but what they had become. "Mom," Andrew finally said quietly, "we didn't know." Evelyn met his eyes. "You didn't ask," she replied calmly. "You assumed." No anger, no shouting, just truth. And that was heavier than anything else. Their silence said everything. Regret. Shame. Realization. They had spent years distancing themselves, ignoring her, taking her for granted, and in a single moment, they saw the result of it all. They had almost taken everything from her, and in return, they received almost nothing. Evelyn slowly stood up, leaning on her cane. For the first time since the stroke, she felt completely certain. Certain about her decision, certain about her life, certain about who truly mattered. Because sometimes, the most important lessons in a family are not about money, not about inheritance, but about what people choose to do when they think no one is watching, and about the doors they never thought to open.